Hello and welcome back to the Nature Garden for a one-off midwinter special. Come along with us as we take a canny wee wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and trees. In this episode, we're catching up with Tom Pattinson in the bleak midwinter, and he's full of busy in and out of the garden. Tom Cadwallender's reflecting on the good and the bad as we move into a new year of birding. And Dr. Zoe Randall is here from Butterfly Conservation to tell us all about the magical, mystical world of moths. And there's a chance to hear another sinister tale from the Hovel from the Alnwick Poison Garden. Plus some top tips for the garden from Tom P. All coming up on the Nature Garden podcast. Winter is well and truly here, and it's a moment, one to reflect on things, to sit back and be toasty and, well, hang on a minute, not quite. War Tom P's putting his hat and gloves on, and he's got some rather splendid seasonal ideas out and about in the garden.
Hello. We've just entered a new calendar year and winter is upon us, and I'm suspecting that some of you may have decided to have given up gardening for a month or two until the weather improves. I know lots of people, including this fellow, who never gives up gardening no matter what time of year, because there's always so much to do. Some of the information we get and the suggestions from gardening magazines and on the television, etc., suggests we clean the tools, put them away in the shed, leave them there until the spring comes round again. I couldn't exist with that. I clean the tools anyway every time I've used them, because if you don't, and you've been using some secateurs on, say, in the middle of summer, pruning something which had disease, that can pass on to another plant of the same species through those secateur blades. So and that is one aspect of it. Another is if you're constantly digging and you never know what's ending up on the spade. Generally some soil, of course, and if you don't clean it down as soon as you've finished, then seeds from weeds, perhaps, wildflowers, weeds, in your garden will spread, and possibly pests and diseases. So it's always place to look after your tools of year round, never mind now. The other thing I smile when I read it is, have your lawnmower serviced now that it's after a long hard season of mowing the lawns, and lay it up for the winter. What a hope. Of course you have to have it serviced. I have mine serviced and I clean it up, but it's not away for the winter. This doesn't happen these days. Used to be the case, but now, last week, for example, I'm looking at 10 to 12 degrees Celsius during the day. This doesn't normally happen late in December, beginning of January. It's not on, but that's been happening. So I'm looking at the lawn. The lawn's looking ragged. The grass is growing. It doesn't take a lot of warmth to get it going. And if I left it like that all winter, the whole garden would look rather ragged, rather like the carpet in your living room. If you don't hoover it and get bits and pieces on it, it doesn't look nice at all. So couple of weeks' time, or as soon as the weather allows, just has to be dry, I'll raise the blades from the summer level, which they were at, or just before I finished mowing, and go over it if it's dry. And the grass is so tough. I mean, during the summer period, if there's a long drought, it goes brown, burnt dry, you'd think it's dead. No, it isn't. The lawn just springs back when there's some rain comes onto it. Conversely, at this time of year, if you think the frost's going to kill it, think again. It stands up to frost as well. But at this time of year, again, not a close cut, not the close cut of summer. If you're going to trim it, just to tidy the garden up and make it look decent, keep it in control, then raise the blades above summer level and everything's fine. These days, I'm looking out from the garden room. I'm surrounded by potted plants in the garden room. Love it. And what a cosy atmosphere it is. Reading the paper, reading a magazine for 5 minutes, having a hot drink, something of that nature, looking out and thinking, gosh, it looks cold out there. But here's the thing. If you don't get on with your planning, there's various stuff has to be done outside now in the fruit beds, for example, to set up those fruits so they'll fruit for you, give you a crop in the summer. And there's a lot of gardening like that, planning and acting at the moment. So here's my plan. It's what we do. Get yourself wrapped up warmly and cover the fingers, the toes, the extremities so you're not going to feel that. And decide, look, I'm going to make a sort of a short-term plan here. I'm going to say, I'm going to plan to be out for an hour. If it turns out to be 2 hours, fine. But set yourself up for it. Keep warm and get on with some work. And you can pick things off. If it's not raining or snowing, of course, get out there and enjoy it. It's so, now I'm searching for the word now. Invigorating, that's it. And satisfying. I've been out doing a few jobs this week, and so's my wife Judy. And when two of you are working on the garden, no matter how small, large, for, say, an hour, just an hour, we did 2 hours one day last week, then it makes such a difference. More of this shortly.
It's been quite a time for our birds over the last 12 months, and Tom Cadwallender's taking a ramble along the Aln estuary and reflecting on the ups and downs and considering some of the current concerns about warbirds and the excitement ahead.
I've wandered down to the Aln estuary. It's dark. I can't see very much, but actually I can hear quite a bit. There's still birds here, and I don't know if you can pick them out in the background. But it's a magical place, this. And I've come down to kind of reflect upon what 24 has been like, ornithologically speaking. Personally, I've had quite a good year. Got a new hip, and that's given me a new lease of life. But, that's another story. In these last month or so, I've been carrying out winter bird surveys on one or two sites in Northumberland. And it's been quite depressing, actually. The lack of farmland birds. It could be that weather has just been so benign that birds are so widely spread. And usually in the wintertime, when the weather cuts in a little bit more fiercely, birds tend to flock more. And we see them in larger numbers. But I haven't seen very many at all. It's been slightly depressing in a way. And I hope that's not kind of indicative of where we're going with farmland birds, although generally the decline has been steady over the last few years. Change in farming practices, climate change, loss of habitat, and you name it, it's all there. And it is quite depressing. And I think finishing the year like that is kind of just left me a little bit sort of flat, And whilst I've had some really fantastic sort of sightings and experiences during 2024, I just feel as if it's going to finish in a kind of flat way. As you'll know, the weather has been fairly benign this winter, apart from the major kind of winds and storms we've had. But here on the Northumberland coast, we haven't really had too much to worry about. Strong winds, yeah, but not much more than that. But the rest of the country has been kind of battered by these kind of major storms, these named storms coming through. It's all doom and gloom, it sounds like, and it's not meant to be, because there's just so much sort of out there that we can see. I've been sort of doing all sorts of things, and whilst I mentioned these farmland bird surveys, generally for farmland birds, what I have discovered, though, is some good flocks of winter thrushes, and they haven't gone right across to the west sides yet, where they would normally do so when they kind of make landfall on the east coast. They would gradually make their way, and then pretty quickly they'd get through into the west side of the country. But actually, I'm finding some quite nice flocks of fieldfares, which is not usual for me anyway. And fieldfares are absolutely wonderful. And with fieldfares, of course, we've got just a few redwings in amongst them. And these are winter thrushes. These are relatives of the birds that we are very familiar with, the blackbirds, song thrushes, and missel thrushes. Fieldfares are probably for me the most spectacular, because they're quite colourful. They're about the size of a missel thrush, which is about sort of 7.5 inches long, and they're quite chunky. But they've got lovely grey backs, lovely grey rump, but they've got this sort of warm kind of buffiness around their breasts, with a kind of really contrasty dark blotches on their breasts, and they love that when they have these. Sorry, I'm getting carried away now. But when they kind of have in their flocks, and they have these contact noises, and it's almost like sort of they're cackling away to each other, and it's great. It's really quite distinctive. All these thrushes have got wonderful little noises, and when they're coming in migration, we can hear sort of redwings. They have a little seep as they're kind of making landfall across the North Sea at the back end of the autumn, and you can hear that occasionally. Blackbirds make a similar sort of noise. But it's the fieldfares which catch my imagination. I think they're wonderful. And they're all kind of, Northumbrian name is Fendi. And I don't know where it comes from, but it's just got a lovely sort of sound to it. The Fendis are in. It's brilliant. It's great. So these birds are kind of heading west eventually through as the winter progresses. And then getting towards the kind of in March time, they'll be making their way back to make their kind of journey back across the North Sea into northern Scandinavia to in the breeding season. So it's all kind of interesting stuff. But yeah, that's one of the kind of nice things that's come out of this mild winter so far, is that we haven't sort of lost those winter thrushes yet. And that's been the highlight of the winter in my farmland bird surveys. It's fascinating, really. So yes, it's all kind of funny. It's been a mixed bag mixed bag and some ups and downs. But actually, one of the real kind of highlights for me is after the depressing breeding seasons on seabird colonies that we've had sort of in 2022 and 2023. I've spoken about this in the pathogenic avian influenza, or bird flu to give its common name, if you like. It's been kind of that's been depressing. But actually, what has been kind of really, really uplifting this year, this breeding season, is how the birds are bouncing back. Absolutely nothing to do with humans at all, really, in their welfare. Although there could be, as a little bit of a side issue there, which I'll come on to in a minute. But actually, on Coquet Island, RSPB Coquet Island, where I help carry out research work, and I've been working on roseate terns, monitoring roseate terns population for over 30 years. I started in 1992, so I've got some experience. And in those days, we were down to sort of 20 pairs, but we've seen the population rise quite significantly. And it's absolutely really uplifting to see that. But anyway, back to 2024 breeding season. And whilst we were expecting numbers not to be as good as they were, because we did lose a lot of these birds through bird flu, and it was actually quite awful picking a lot of my old friends at birds I knew because I'd ringed them. I had put the metal rings on their legs. But actually this year, whilst the numbers are marginally down, the productivity is how many young they will actually, a pair will fledge into the wild. Normally it's kind of 0.8 or 0.9, but that's kind of how it's an odd number. That's an odd thing to say, but actually it's averages. So that's how it averages out across the pairs. But this year it's been just a smidge under 1.4, which is absolutely phenomenal. And it's only the second time we've actually got anywhere near that sort of number. And that really, really, really bodes well for the future. These birds are fledged and they're down in Africa now, in Ghana, the Gulf of Guinea, sort of spending their winter. And these young birds, these birds of this year, this young of this year, will not make their return journey until 2026. So they've got a bit of time to spend and sort of develop and grow up, which is quite encouraging. But we'll not see the kind of the benefit of that until 2026. So we're looking forward to 2025 and see what's going to happen then. But actually, they're going back to the productivity. It hasn't been just the roseate terns. It's been the sandwich terns, the common terns, the Arctic terns. All breed on Coquet Island, and where I have some experience, where I've watched them all. And it's indeed the kind of the kittiwakes are the same. There's been so much food coming in, and it's been incredible. And why do you say, why you can ask, why is there so much food around? It could be twofold. It could be a number of things, of course. But off the top of my head, I'm thinking, well, perhaps there's just a little bit less competition for the food. And so there's more food around generally for these wild birds, these seabirds. And the species I'm talking about are sand eels. And that's kind of the food, the fuel for all the birds that we have breeding on our seabird colonies. So there's more of them around. This appears to be a lot coming in. Obviously, fewer birds going in and fishing for them. That could be part of the answer, and it probably will be. But also, there's this moratoria on sand eel fishing, and that has just meant that the stocks of sand eels in the North Sea has been pretty high. I haven't heard of any numbers yet, but the numbers must be pretty high. There's a lot of food around, and every bird has benefited from that. So this moratoria is really quite useful. And there's signs that there could be some pressure on allowing commercial fishing into our bit of the North Sea to kind of try to exploit those resources, as they say, which is quite sort of worrying. We know what's happened in the Northern Isles, Shetland and Orkney, when the big factory ships went in there, vacuumed up huge numbers, huge weight of kind of sand eels. The birds are the kind of the greatest indicator of all of the kind of the good and the bad about that, and there wasn't very much good about it at all, because the terns that used to breed on the Northern Isles just didn't breed. They didn't raise any young at all, and that is a incredibly worrying thing. So I hope that doesn't happen here. There's some pressure. Interesting stuff. But, there's the big thing that's on the horizon that we regularly talk about, and that's climate change. And that's going to have a big impact on a lot of our seabirds, because sand eels, as I've mentioned before, are the staple of kind of all our breeding seabirds. But they're a cold water species. And when the sea temperature goes up, these fish will actually retreat further north, and the birds will follow. Puffins, guillemots, razorbills, we're at the southern end of their range. So you can imagine their range sort of contracting north again, following the food. What will happen to these birds like terns, which come from the south to breed here, is another story altogether. Hopefully there will be a food resource for them to exploit when and if this happens. We have been talking about it for some time now. So yes, it's a mixed bag of things, I have to say, and it's goodness knows what's going to happen. But I do know that there is a joy to be had, to be outside in the wild, watching nature, looking at nature, experiencing nature. And it's something that we should all enjoy and kind of just get out there and open your eyes and see what's there. It's absolutely fantastic. And I've lived my life looking at birds. And I tell you, I'm just at peace with myself, because it's just given me one of the most wonderful lives I can imagine. In fact, as a young guy, I could never have imagined me having this life I have now, just revolving around natural history and birds in particular. And here I am, I'm getting on a bit now, but it's just been an amazing life. So professionally, I still work in birds, and as an amateur, I'm still volunteering. And just as an individual, I'm getting out there, taking great pleasure in bird watching and enjoying nature, opening my eyes. It's wonderful. Anyway, folks, that's enough of me rambling. Goodness me, I've rambled a bit. I'm optimistic. I'm always optimistic. And so we should be. So I'm looking forward to 2025, and I hope you are too. Happy New Year, folks, and Gan Canny.
There's no stopping Tom P, and a few frosty days are no deterrent. He's doing a few hours in the garden, checking the hardy shrubs, and the apples and their fruit buds, and planning ahead.
When I'm out and about locally at the moment, people will stop me and I'll get that old rhetorical question. Oh, you can't be doing much in the garden at present, can you? And I answer, of course, I'm delighted to answer. Not doing much in the garden at the moment, you must be kidding. The apples need to be pruned, winter pruning right now. If the ground's frosty, all to the good, because you'll not be making a mess, treading over it, spoiling the soil structure, as you do when it's far too wet to get on the land. Frosty day is ideal, but it can be a sunny day as long as the ground is sound beneath you. During summer, we have a collection of apples, and during the summertime, I summer prune them, as you do. Lots of laterals go out side shoots from the main stems. First and foremost, the flowers come in about May. There's a good set if the insect life is around, and it helps if they're self-fertile, the fruits, the varieties you have as well, of course. But the fruit set, and then the growth keeps going beyond the fruits. Now, if you're left out going all of the time, you just have lots of young wood, and that's no good. So about July, mid-July to the end of July, during that fortnight, I generally take those long shoots just beyond the fruit and bring them back to about maybe 15 centimetres, 6 inches, 15 centimetres, something like that. And that's the first pruning. This sends a message to the apple tree saying, we're not going to be keep growing. It's not going to let us grow on forever here. We better start maturing a wee bit, and they start maturing. And with maturity comes the formation of fruit buds. Now, leave it until this time of year, and those pieces that are left, those extended pieces which went beyond the fruit of 15 centimetres, I'm cutting them back to 2 or 3 buds. Those lovely round plumpish buds, which I recognise as fruit buds. And that's it left. This is spur pruning for you. And all of the apples I grow here are spur pruned. So we have a long main stem leading and little spurs coming from them, which will fruit next year. That's one of the jobs we're doing at the moment. And there are various shrubs out there, hardy perennial shrubs, which need chopping down as well. Not all shrubs need chopping down this time of year, by the way, but some of them do, and it's good for them. Say the fuchsia. I have a little collection of hardy fuchsias, gracilis, hawk's head, and things of that nature. And they grow up to about 1 metre, 2 metres tall, some of them, in a single summer from 0. And this time of year, all the flowers have gone. They've lost their leaves. So I'm cutting those stems back down to about 5 to 10 centimetres from the base, from the soil level. And that's set them up for the period we're into now. And for next year, they'll start growing again in spring. And about the late June, early July period, the first little fuchsias will appear on there. Brilliant, different coloured varieties, and they'll flower throughout summer, way up to the frost. There's another one there called the pheasant berry. That's Lycisteria formosa. I never see the pheasant eating the berries. It does have berries, actually, eventually, after the flowers have gone. But I do see the blackbirds pecking away to eating it. And the result of that is they're dropping the seeds, hard seed coats, way around the garden. So at this time of year, leave the pale green stems in place and enjoy them throughout winter. This is the pheasant berry, or Lycisteria famosa. Or I can chop it down, knowing fair well it'll grow up quite a way quickly, grow up next year. What I'm finding at the moment is seedlings or young plants of that, sown by the blackbirds, no other. I'm digging those up, potting them up, because they're nice shrubs, and find some lovely homes for them. Someone will appreciate them in the garden. I generally do that this time of year, and they're not the only plants to look out for in the garden. If you're out in the garden for a short while at this time of year, just see what nature has provided you with. On the berry side, you'll have some shrub roses, for example. The birds eat those, pass the stones through the cistern, deposit them somewhere with a dollop of natural manure, herd manure, and away they come. Another one's Cotoneaster. Some people around here call it Cotoneaster. Doesn't matter what you call it. Cotoneaster fits for me, and there's some lovely shrubs in that, hardy shrubs in that area. They're good as well. So you're getting shrubs for free around the garden. Gosh, this is thirsty work, Carl. I think we deserve a cup of tea.
Moth numbers have been plummeting, and it's such a shame. Not only are they beautiful, they're also incredibly important. And Dr. Zoe Randall from Butterfly Conservation is here to tell us how we can all help moths at home.
Hello, Carl. I'm here to tell you that moths matter. There are around 2,500 species of moth in the UK, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, from tiny micro moths to huge hawk moths. And they're far from being drab and brown. There are stripy moths, spotty moths, checkered moths. Some are bright green or pink or even red, and some look like leaves, while others look like entirely different species. So they camouflage themselves, and some of them look like hornets. Whilst the majority of moths do fly at night, there are actually more day-flying moths in the UK than there are butterflies. And moths matter, not only because they're fascinating insects, but because they play an important role in the food web. The UK's wildlife depends on moths, like bats and birds who need moths for food, and plants which need them for pollination. In fact, research shows that moths can be more efficient pollinators at night than day-flying insects like bees. And they pollinate a variety of different species, from flowers to crops. But sadly, moth numbers in the UK have fallen by a third since the 1970s. And as with our butterflies, this year has been particularly bad for lots of moths. In the last century, more than 50 moths have gone extinct, including the Brighton wainscot, the bordered gothic, and the stout dart. So why are moths under threat? Well, habitat loss and degradation means there are fewer places that moths can thrive and survive, and habitat fragmentation means that moth colonies are becoming more and more isolated, which makes them more vulnerable to extinction. Moths are also under threat from changes in the way the land is managed, like cutting hedges too frequently, pesticide use, and of course climate change. Light pollution can also have an impact on moth populations. Artificial lights can disorientate moths, and they may spend a lot of time travelling around artificial lights and circling them and bumping into them, and this can leave them too exhausted to find food or to breed. Moths drawn to artificial lights are also vulnerable to predation, and it's not just the adult moths that are affected. Some moth caterpillars are attracted to artificial light, which could take them away from food sources, leave them more vulnerable to predators, and impact their development. So what can you do to help? Well, there are lots of things that people can do to help moths at home. By creating a wild space, whether you've got a balcony, a large garden, you can provide moths with vital food and shelter. Some plants to include to provide nectar for adult moths are jasmine, sweet rocket and night-scented stock. You can also feed moth caterpillars by planting things like mint, ivy and honeysuckle, as well as allowing patches of dandelions, nettles and long grass to grow in your garden. If you've got the space, creating a hedge that includes hawthorn, bramble, hazel and privet can provide food for lots of different moth species. And don't worry, you're unlikely to attract moths that enjoy eating clothes. because out of more than 2,500 species, there's only a handful that eat natural fibres, like wool and fur. Moths also need safe places to shelter and pupate, so leave your leaf litter where it is in your garden, leave old stems uncut over winter, and create habitat piles by stacking branches and twigs. And don't forget about lighting. If you have lights in your wild space, use warm colours which are less likely to attract moths. Put the lights on timers so they switch off when you're not using them, and try light shields so that light doesn't spill further out than is needed. To find out more about our amazing moths, visit www.butterfly-conservation.org/moths-matter and join in on our social channels at Save Butterflies using the hashtag mothsmatter. So hashtag mothsmatter. Thank you.
Dr. Zoe Randall, Senior Surveys Officer at Butterfly Conservation there. And that hashtag again is hashtag moths matter. Moths matter. Now, it seems like a while since we last heard from John Knox at the Alnwick Poison Garden, so let's hand over to John for the latest instalment of Tales from the Hovel.
Welcome back to Tales from the Hovel, where we stir the bubbling cauldron of history and ladle out stories dripping with intrigue, death, and of course poison. I'm John, your guide through today's grim adventure. This week we're travelling back to Victorian England, to a town so sleepy it didn't notice one of its own was wide awake, plotting murder. This is the story of William Palmer, the Rugley poisoner, a doctor with charm, wit, and a medical bag stuffed with secrets. Picture it, Staffordshire, 1855, the smell of coal smoke in the air, the clip-clop of hooves on cobbled streets. Dr. William Palmer, respected, affable, the man you trust with your life, walks through the town tipping his hat and flashing that boyish grin. But behind that smile, a man drowning in debt, clawing for money and clutching at straws of desperation. And when you hand like that, a man like that, the key to death in liquid form, well, let's just say his prescriptions come with a little more than a sting in the tail. William Palmer was no ordinary doctor. He had a flair for horse racing and a fatal addiction to gambling. By night, the good doctor prowled the betting rings, losing pounds as fast as he made them. But Palmer wasn't just unlucky, he was reckless. His debts spiralled, creditors circled, and then, as if struck by a devilish epiphany, Palmer realised his ticket out wasn't winning money, it was stealing it. And what better way than with the deadly precision of a doctor's hand? Enter strychnine, Palmer's poison of choice. Extracted from the seeds of the Strychnos nux vomica tree, it was medicine's dark little secret. Imagine one tiny dose that sends your muscles twitching, another spasming. Soon every muscle locks tight, your body a rigid, agonised bow, or so far back your head nearly kisses your heels. And the grand finale? Asphyxiation. Your lungs betray you, frozen in a silent scream. That's the terror William Palmer bottled up and poured down his victims' throats. Let's talk about John Parsons Cook, a fellow gambler. Cook had just won big at the Shrewsbury races. He celebrated with champagne and unknowingly signed his death warrant. Palmer, ever the charming friend, toasted to Cook's success with one hand and pocketed his winnings with the other. But Palmer didn't stop there, oh no. He played the concerned doctor as Cook fell sick, writhing in spasms while Palmer whispered soothing words and handed him medicine. The kind of medicine that brought death crawling closer with every dose. Cook's death wasn't peaceful. It was a grotesque spectacle of convulsions, grasps, and agony. Witnesses described his body contorting in ways that defied nature. And all the while Palmer stood by, calm as a viper, waiting for its prey to stop twitching. Palmer's murders didn't go unnoticed for long. Insurance claims, sudden deaths, mountain deaths. It was all too suspicious. When authorities ordered an autopsy on Cook, Palmer's calm began to crack. But here's the twist. Palmer wasn't just a one-hit poisoner. No, he was prolific. His wife, his brother, even his own children, many whispered, their untimely deaths were his handiwork. 14 victims this year, 14 lives stolen to fund his gambling habit. And the Rugeley poisoner didn't even bat an eye. When Palmer was arrested, the trial became a sensation. Crowds swarmed in Stafford courthouse, devouring every sordid detail splashed across the papers. The press crowned him the Prince of Poisoners, and for good reason. By the end, Palmer was found guilty of Cook's murder, though the court suspected he had many more skeletons rattling away in his closet. On June 14, 1856, Palmer was led to the gallows at Stafford Prison. His last words, "Are you sure it's safe?" Palmer swung that day, but his crimes left a scar on Victorian England. His trial fueled the rise of forensic toxicology, making poisons easier to detect. In a twisted way, Palmer's cunning made the world a little safer, but only after his victims paid the ultimate price. Thanks for joining me on this Tales from the Hovel. If you're not too afraid to come back, we'll be waiting next time with another twisted tale. Until then, keep your wits about you and remember, no picking, no licking.
I'm Tom Heap from Countryfile, and you're listening to the Nature Garden podcast. And so, to the sound of War Blackbird, here's Tom with some jobs to be getting on with at the moment.
Well, jobs for the week time. I mentioned earlier about preparing the fruit. Any preparation you do now for top fruits, that's the tree types like the apple, the pear, the plum. Any preparation, you don't prune the plum at the moment, by the way, not in winter time, because that silver leaf disease might gain entry through large pruning cuts. So no pruning for the plum, but those top fruits, or the plum, the pear, the apple, etc., they all need a good mulch at the moment. That's organic matter which has been composted, or some old manure from cow, horse perhaps. We're fortunate we have a horse, and it produces the manure that we need, only you have to weather it first. It's no good putting it on really fresh from the horse. Best when it's weathered. Composted material, anything of that nature, or what was once organic, a mulch on the surface. That will keep the roots of your fruit, your soft fruits, and such as black currants, red currants, gooseberries, and your strawberries, of course, and the raspberries. It'll keep them, the roots warmer during the winter period, and of course cool in summer, and it suppresses weeds while it's busy doing those things. So it's always useful to have that mulch in place, and this is the best time of year to be doing it. That's the first thing for me at the moment, the job. I'm also remembering that a couple of months ago we're talking about planting. Yeah, just 2 months ago, maybe 3. Planting in autumn. It was nature's planting time. We were bare-rooted planting. Well, it's still bare-rooted planting time, and this extends, introducing new shrubs or moving some existing shrubs or fruit trees, bushes around the garden, because most of them are dormant at the moment. And while they're taking their peeps or they're sleeping, then they don't know they're being moved. If you get as much ball of soil on the roots as you can, if not, don't worry, they will recover because they're not growing at the moment. So those things can be, if there's a plant that's been in a position it shouldn't be in, or it's too aggressive, or it's growing too vigorous for the place, one solution is to prune it. But if you keep pruning it, there comes a stage where you've got to say, look, it's just not suitable for that spot, I'm going to move it. So if you can, dig it up, and you can't lift it, then just put it on some sort of fabric and trail it across the lawn or across the garden to a new planting spot. And this idea of planting something you've bought, either picked up, bought at the garden centre because you've seen it, you've chosen the best one, or if it's something arriving by mail, say 2 or 3 roses you've ordered. Get them into that bucket of water for a couple of nights to make sure they're fully charged with water. And if there's no frost around, get them planted. And this can happen any decent weather in the absence of frost, or of course you don't want to be planting out in the snow or rain. From now until the point of spring next year. And that's something you must not forget about that. Don't feel, oh, I've got to wait till spring to start planting. You haven't. You can get that done now if you wish. I'm in the greenhouse occasionally at the moment. I'm having short bursts outside. My wife and I, Judy, are both doing that. And when you come back in, you think, not time to go in the house yet. I'll go into the greenhouse. Well, it's an unheated greenhouse, but it's relatively warm in there. So some of the plants that I've been digging up, my freebie saplings, seedlings around the garden, which have self-sown or been sown from bird-deposited seeds, I've healed them into the garden, just put them under the soil, the roots, and it's time, an excuse to go into the greenhouse and put some of them into pots. And if I put them into pots, there are some presents for friends. Find them a good home to go into. So I'm working in the greenhouse as well at the moment. If you get too cold outside, nice little place to stop. And there's got to be a hot drink there somewhere in it, just as we stop for a tea at a certain stage during this programme. I've got my main seed order to hand, so they're ready. I've sown my onions. I do exhibition onions. I judge onion shows. I don't exhibit, but I still love to grow some big onions. So I've got those traditionally in this neck of the woods, North Northumberland. Boxing Day is the day you sow your onions. As I haven't got heat in the greenhouse, I start them off in the airing cupboard or the garden room or conservatory. Oh, don't give up on gardening just because winter's here. Keep in touch with the plants around the garden. You'll enjoy it. Get outside. Short bursts, that's all it takes. And as I said before, wrap up warmly. And whatever else happens, enjoy your gardening.
You've been listening to gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, Dr. Zoe Randall, Senior Surveys Officer at Butterfly Conservation, and John Knox from the Alnwick Poison Garden. I'm Carl Steinson, thanks for listening, and we'll be back on the radio and with the new season of podcasts in the spring. Until then, enjoy your gardening and time outdoors with nature. Bye for now.